what I want you to do is I want you to imagine you're walking along the street and you happen to walk past my house and I'm there and there's leaves all over my lawn. And I say to you, and I say, oh, hi, would you mind actually raking up my leaves for me? And you don't like raking up leaves, you say and it's going to be boring and hard work, and it's a hot day, and you haven't got your leaf raking shoes on. So, you know, you really don't want to. But I say, please, could you do? And you eventually relent, say, all right, I will do it. And you rake up the leaves, maybe an hour or two doing this. And then at the end, I say, thank you very much. That's great. I really appreciate it. Let me give you some money. And I either give you $5 or I give you $100. Then you go home and your roommate says, where have you been? You said, well, I was raking leaves. And your roommate says, wait a minute, do you like raking leaves? Now, and the question I have for you is, are you more likely to say and actually feel that you like raking leaves to your roommate if you were paid $5 or if you were paid $100 after doing the leaf raking? And there's a huge amount of research done for many years across many different contexts on the topic known as cognitive dissonance, which shows that people would be more likely to say they enjoyed it and actually enjoy it more if they were paid $5 than if they were paid $100.
Which again is a phenomenon known as cognitive dissonance.
That's right. So the idea of cognitive dissonance is that there's a dissonance or an uncomfortable feeling that arises when there's an inconsistency between our attitudes and our behaviors. So if we think and believe in one thing but do another, that makes us feel not good. And so if you put yourself in the case of the leaf raking example, so there are lots of things, right? Lots of unpleasant things you would do for $100, but you know, raking leaves, you got paid $100 for it. Well, that's okay. That doesn't need any kind of explanation. Whereas if you did the raking leaves and only got paid $5, then you have to make sense of the fact, oh, I raked the leaves and I only got paid $5, so the money can't really justify it. How can my attitudes be consistent with this behavior? I'm going to change my attitudes to bring them in line with my past behaviors, because I can't change my behaviors because they're in the past. So the idea here is if you can get somebody to do a behavior that's in a certain direction, then they will bring their attitudes in line with those behaviors.
Ordinarily, when we think about changing people's behaviors, we have this idea that we need to convince them first. We need to change their attitudes, we need to change their values, and their behaviors will follow. But this suggests that it can actually go the opposite direction, that people can be made or convinced to do things just to do them, maybe small things, and that's going to lead their values and their attitudes, you know, to follow the behavior. So this is known as the foot in the door technique, and it's used by salespeople, it's used by all organizations that have ever wanted for you to give them money, it's used by politicians all the time. And the idea here is if we can convince you to make a small action, then that's going to change your values and attitudes to reduce cognitive dissonance, and that's going to increase your likelihood of making a larger action in the future. So if you are only paid $5 to rake Sam's leaves, you're also more likely to do something for him again because you've convinced yourself that it's really important to you to either do yard work or do things for Sam. This is a technique that's also been validated empirically in social psychology studies.
That's right. So there was a very famous study where you could imagine there was a whole neighborhood and the researchers randomly divided up the houses within that neighborhood into Group A and Group B. Group A they went to and they said, here's a little postcard which says drive carefully on it. Would you mind please putting this in your window? Just a small postcard. Driving carefully is a good thing. Everybody agrees to put this little postcard in their window. Group B, they didn't do anything. These people didn't even know anything about the study at this point. Then they come back a few weeks later with this big, ugly sign saying, drive carefully, and ask everybody to put it in their yard. And what they found was that those people who had previously been given the postcard saying, drive carefully, they were many times more likely to agree to put the big, ugly sign in their front yard saying, drive carefully, than were the people who had not been contacted before by the researchers. And the idea here is that the people with the postcard, when they're asked to put this big sign, they think, well, actually, look, I did put up a postcard before saying drive carefully, so that's I must believe in that. They brought their attitudes into line with their actions. I must be a believer in driving carefully, so yes, I'm going to continue to do that, and I'm going to support, I'm going to let you put your big ugly sign in my front yard.
So this is a technique that's used by all sorts of organizations, and it can lead to apparently paradoxical results. So we know from research that members of fraternities who were hazed more are more likely to report positive feelings toward their fraternity, greater feelings of connection. Well, why would that be? Well, if you're trying to make sense of why you let a group of people, ritually hurt you, it might help to bring your attitudes of this must be such a great organization that I'm part of. And it's a very similar process in a more extreme way when we're thinking about cults. So why don't you take a turn making dinner? Why don't you give up part of your income? Why don't you share some of your possessions? This escalating sort of demands is eventually what leads some people to very extreme behavior.
And with each escalation, you're more likely to do the next one.
Exactly.